Welcome to episode 1 of the Diet by God's Design podcast. I am so glad you're here. In this episode, I'm going to dig into a little bit of my story so you know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm also going to talk about expectations you can have for this podcast, and then we'll finish up with a little giveaway announcement, so stay tuned for that. So first, we're going to start digging into my story. A few years ago, I was in school and finishing up school to become a registered dietitian. And when I got out of school, I was pregnant with my son, our first child. And I just realized in the real world, what am I doing? Because in my training, it was for clinical nutrition. So I really only knew how people should eat on certain medications, not necessarily how they should eat in real life before they even get on medications. And I was just really passionate about reaching the people who are not yet on a bunch of medications, but are having a lot of problems now that are either thrown off by the doctor as, well, we don't know what's wrong. So I just realized I was not trained for real life. As I started teaching myself more about nutrition outside of the hospital, like how we're supposed to eat, I started realizing that a lot of conventional medicine is actually based on evolution and Darwinism. Just when you started reading a bunch of the people, doctors and research gurus that are spearheading the medical field, I started realizing they were constantly talking about how we're a million years old and come from bacteria. And as a Christian, believer of the Bible, I do not accept that view whatsoever. And so I just started paying closer attention as I was reading more research studies and reading more interpretations of medical experts of these research studies. I started realizing I couldn't agree with them because their premise is based on an idea that we evolved and that we could create our own future and it's survival of the fittest. And I just cannot get behind that. So as I dug a little deeper, I realized that my stance in the health realm is not that we come from bacteria over millions of billions of years, but that we've been intelligently designed by a creator, and that creator is God. As I started digging into the nutrition side, I saw this evolution creeping into there. What I started seeing was how man likes to rebel and do what they want to do, live however they want to live, eat the way, let's be honest, we like to eat the way we want to eat and not have the consequences of how we eat. I just realized that we are not really eating intentionally. Like, why are we eating what we're eating? And what makes us eat those things? Are we considering that if we've been intelligently designed by God, that we should be eating a certain way, that He has designed our bodies to work and be fueled a specific way, our health, that it works a certain way too? So as I started digging into it again, I started seeing we're eating however way we want to eat. And on top of that, we're manipulating food like never before since the Industrial Revolution. Not that manipulation is necessarily bad, but it's man thinking man knows best and starting to mess with things that God had originally designed for our good. And we don't know how our manipulation of that food changes the construct of that food and the way the food communicates to our body and our body uses the food. I just saw this shift for convenience. And this can come in the form of GMOs and spraying chemicals on crops, all the way up to how we process food. There's this manipulation that hadn't been here before since the Industrial Revolution that really paves the way for the ability for man to diet by man's design and not by God's design. And so when I started realizing that, I was like, wait a minute, but I believe that if we live how God designed us to live, we will be preventing a lot of health problems. Or we can live however we want to live by our own design, and then we end up just treating consequences with medications and supplements and other things. This is really fascinating to me, and this is why I'm starting this podcast. So really this podcast is to expose the lies we've adopted into our health worldview, unknowingly most likely, But by exposing the lies, I hope that we can restore our relationship with our health and put God back in the center of it. He designed our bodies to work a certain way. And then we need to be dieting by His design, not our own design. And so that's kind of my story that brings me to why I'm here in this podcast and why I'm speaking out. And I hope that this podcast will be very helpful for you as we dig into what God's design is. And is it a list of things to eat and not to eat? Or is it, a little more, complicated than that? So we'll dig into that in this podcast. And that's what you can expect content-wise. What you can expect podcast-wise is these I'm trying to keep short because I know you're probably tired and you don't have much time, you're rushed. And so 20 minutes, I'm trying to keep them short, 20 minutes or less. These will be weekly. Of course, I'll have to take some weeks off here and there as time goes on, but hopefully I can keep up with weekly podcasts, especially with how short they will be. And that's what you can expect from this podcast. So now we can talk about the exciting giveaway that I'm having to launch my podcast. I wanted to do a 1-hour goals coaching session where we go over your top health goals and dig into what's blocking you from reaching them. And then we come up with an actionable plan. So I'm willing to give away a free hour with someone lucky, whoever wins. And all you have to do, if this interests you and you want to enter, all you have to do is enter by subscribing to this podcast, writing a review, and tagging a friend in the comments of my Instagram or Facebook podcast launch post, which I will put a link in the show notes below. And I want you to tag someone who you think would also love this podcast. So the whole point of this is subscribe, reviewing, and tagging is to help increase the spread of this podcast, because I think there are a lot of women that have believed some lies about what role we play in our health or what God has said He does in regards to our health. So I want to expose those lies, bring those out to light so that we can learn how to diet simply and sustainably for the rest of our life. Really, I believe we can get to that if we return to our design. It's as simple as that. And so really digging into what is our design. That's what this podcast is. So if you know someone who needs to hear this or who would love to hear it, then I would love if you would tag them in that social media post in the show notes below. Back to the giveaway, the 1-hour goals coaching session. Told you how to enter, subscribe, review, tag. And you got to do this by this coming Friday at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. And that's when the door will close and the winner will be announced on Instagram on that Saturday, that following Saturday. If you qualify for that, then please enter. I would love to give this giveaway to someone out there who's listening. That is all I have for this first episode, and I really hope you enjoyed it. And I hope to hear from you in the reviews.